I started managing this 6-unit building. At the time, I was practicing law. I had my own law firm.
Fast forward a few years.
We have 320 active properties. We're in the process of onboarding about 20 properties.
When you look back at that time, what was the main lesson that you took out of that difficult time?
I'm a lawyer. I'm risk adverse. I had a very set path. COVID made me realize that there is no set path. Running a business, you do whatever you have to do. You have to adapt and you have to survive.
How are you, as an investor of a multi-unit property, able to get the best of both worlds in terms of the financing for the long term, while also getting the cash flow and liquidity of the short term?
We never raised money. We never borrowed money. We just needed to keep growing.
It's not every day that you get to talk with someone that's doing this that also has that law background. What are some of the things from a liability perspective that operators might be missing out on?
If something happens, who's responsible? And did I do everything I could reasonably do to protect whoever I owe that obligation to?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hospitality Edge podcast, where we bring together what we think are two sides of the same coin, real estate and hospitality, and where we really bring here leaders, entrepreneurs, investors, operators, and founders in the space so they can tell us more about the stories of how they've built their companies, the lessons that they have learned along the way, maybe even some of the mistakes that they have made, so we don't have to make those same mistakes ourselves. And very, very excited here to be with Dunzi, CEO at Sojourn DC. Dunzi, thank you so much for being here. Can you please tell us where you're taking the call from, and at a high level, what you do for a living and what Sojourn is all about? And I messed up the pronunciation twice, but you'll do it right. Thank you again for being here.
Okay. No, it's my pleasure. And no worries. It's just a nickname. So if you screw it up, it's okay. So I am sitting in what is going to be our new office. Although we don't have much furniture yet. We are moving in here. We're very excited because, we're at 411 East Capitol, which for those of you who know Washington, DC, we're literally 4 blocks from the Capitol, which we are preparing for Halloween on East Capitol, which is a huge deal. So that's where I physically am. This is where Sojourn got its start in Washington, DC. This is where I live and where at the time my partner, Nicole, and my partner and co-founder, Nicole, lived. So we are a hospitality property management company located in Washington, D.C. and the Tidewater region, which is the Norfolk area, Virginia Beach, Sandbridge, which then connects through to the Outer Banks. And then we have sort of we call them OMs, other markets, just like a spattering of properties in other markets that people have asked us to manage. So we help them with their management in a couple of other markets.
Mm-hmm.
We are a hospitality brand, and with that, associated with that, also a property management company. We are very, very diversified. We, as I said, started in an urban market doing a hybrid approach, which means doing both short-term and 30 plus days.
Mm-hmm.
And then during COVID, had the opportunity to expand in Norfolk, and then really expanded down through Virginia Beach to Sandbridge, which is like true vacation rental.
Mm-hmm.
And so we sort of are, as I said, completely diverse, all the way from like the urban micro studio to like the 8-bedroom home in a vacation rental market.
Wow. And also quite large operation as well, past 300 properties under management.
Yeah, we have 320 active properties. We're in the process of onboarding probably about 20 properties. So yes, we are growing all organically. So we've grown
Awesome.
from, I don't know, we started probably with about 30 units. in June 2019, and have just been prodding along. Yeah, just been
Hmm.
prodding along.
And we'll have to dig deeper into that and understand how that happened. But before we do that, help me understand how a lawyer ends up working in this hospitality vacation rental industry.
Yeah, and not even a real estate lawyer, but a
Hmm.
Canadian trade lawyer. So yes,
Right.
it is very strange, but basically, close to where I'm sitting now, on Capitol Hill, my husband bought a building around the corner from our house. Uh, that when it was delivered, the developer suggested that we furnish it and put it on Airbnb. And this was 2015. And we said, "What's that?" Um, anyway, so we tried it. We furnished all the units and we put it up on Airbnb. And springtime in DC is like the best time to be doing short-term rentals. And Capitol Hill, like this unit was 5 blocks from the Capitol. So needless to say, we made a lot of money in a very short time.
Hmm.
Um, and so I started, like most people, I think, in this business, just kind of started managing this 6 unit building. At the time, I was practicing law. I had my own law firm at that time, and I had 2 small kids. And so I couldn't really manage 6 units. And so this guy who was working for my husband at the time found me guesty back in 2015. And I think they had just started. And through that, I was able to sort of maybe perhaps using my logic skills from law school, figured out a method by which I could manipulate the calendars and do both short term and midterm. So plus
Hmm.
30 days. And my rationale at that time for doing that was that I couldn't manage 6 short-term units.
Hmm.
I couldn't handle all the turnovers. I just couldn't handle it. And so this gave me some reprieve because, if I got someone in a unit for 3 months, then I didn't really have to deal with them.
And the
It,
short stays, you saw them as a way to fill in the gaps or as a way to make more money when it was, high season, and then the rest of the year just kind of like leave it
well, I
long
started
term.
not really knowing what I was doing. So I
Right.
started just on Airbnb doing short term.
Hmm.
And then I sort of figured out all these other platforms where I could get these midterm renters. Some of them
Hmm.
have, you know, gone away. I mean, corporate housing by owner, I think is still around, but it's not a
Hmm.
very active site. Using
Hmm.
Sublet back then, which then was purchased by Nest Pick, which was then purchased by Blue Ground. So you see, like things are changing so
Hmm.
quickly. Um, and so yeah, it just kind of happened. And then I realized that in the summer, I'd like to go to Canada, where I'm from,
Hmm.
and so I would fill the building with interns
Hmm.
and leads for the summer. So it was
Good,
partially because
good
the
time.
lead,
Good time to go to Canada, by the way.
yeah,
Good time of the year to go to Canada.
yeah, yes. Well, especially Winnipeg. Um, anyway, for me, it I started doing it out of necessity and to relieve some of the stress. But then I realized, yes, DC has a very distinct rhythm. And, there are certain times of the year where the nightly rates are so high, it's worth the stress,
Hmm.
and then other times, like if I could get a midterm renter from November through to the end of February, then that would be great. Because the nightly rates are low enough that the monthly rate was almost equivalent.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
and so I started doing that, and that's what I was doing. And then I got sick of it. And at the time, Airbnb was sort of um, highlighting professional hosts, which I think they're doing again. Um, and I went on there and I found my now business partner, Nicole. So
Hmm.
um, but to be fair, before I did that, I went out into the market to find someone to manage my properties. And at the time, you could only find people that either did nightly or monthly. Nobody
Mhm.
did both.
Mhm.
And so there I was looking at this thinking, okay, so you want me to give you 20% and I'm going to make about 20% less profit because yes, there is that whole idea of backfilling. So even if you went with a monthly provider, they wouldn't backfill. So there'd be so much more lost revenue.
Mhm.
And so I decided I couldn't take like a 40% cut in what I was making. That just didn't make sense. I might as well not practice law. So then I saw these co-hosts. So I thought, okay, I'm going to see if this will work. So I found Nicole. We started meeting. We got along great. And 5 years later, we still do.
Mhm.
And interviewed her. She was doing lease arbitrage at the time. She had her own
Okay.
business doing lease arbitrage. And so she was only doing short term. She had no exposure to midterm rentals.
Mhm.
So I taught her how to do that and how to work the calendar, right? Because sometimes you would have to like move people around and things like that, which is again not as easy these days. But so then I went home for the summer and left her, and it was great. Summer. And then I came back and had lunch through my husband with someone who I had no idea. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know anything about him. So he asked me
Mhm.
how it, about our property. And I told him how I was managing it. And he was very interested in this hybrid model for his
Mhm.
properties.
Okay.
Turns out that he had, I mean, like 6 properties at the time, I wanna say, and when I say properties, this is DC, so these are not big vacation rental properties. These are, you know, 6 to 12 units within one building. So a
Mhm.
multifamily, but, uh, not a huge multifamily and not a huge house, but a
Mhm.
lot of units. And so, anyway, the long and the short of it is, I offered to introduce him to Nicole, and my husband was like, "You can't do that." You can't like develop a process, um, find a client, train someone in that process, give her the client and walk away. You're going to have to
Mhm.
participate.
Mhm.
So I did that. We started working together. We created the brand, we created the website, and then I was supposed to be relatively hands off. Uh, but then COVID came
Mhm.
and there was just so much to deal with that I started working in the business. And then we started just to grow. So, yeah,
Wow. Okay.
that's it. It was
So
just kind
so
of progressive.
yeah, no, and I wanna break down the timeline even further because you did a great job at helping us understand, how it happened progressively. But then like a couple of things. First of all, when you're looking at management companies to potentially give them your property and you realize nothing quite solves for what you needed, was there something
Mm,
other than the fact that no company was doing both long term, midterm, and short term that you identified as an opportunity where you decided to go find a co host instead? Or was that the main thing that you couldn't find out there?
yeah, I didn't know enough uh, to know anything but the numbers at that
Mm-hmm.
point.
Mm-hmm.
What I did know though was I knew the clientele was pretty demanding, which
Mm-hmm.
is one of the reasons that I chose Nicole without knowing her, was because she had worked as a bartender at the Old Ebbitt Grill, which
Mm-hmm.
is, I don't know if it still is, but at one point was the highest grossing restaurant bar, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's right across from the White House. And so the clientele, it's extremely busy and it is extremely demanding clientele. There's a lot of lawyers in this town. There's a lot of lobbyists. There's a lot of people who want things a certain way,
Yeah.
um, or are in high stress jobs and don't want to deal with certain things. So all that to say is that my building had at the time certain things, certain
Mm-hmm.
to make people comfortable. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I guess I had certain standards. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't even know enough to know that they wouldn't have necessarily met those standards.
Okay.
So it
Okay.
really was just a numbers thing.
Okay. And then you essentially decide that you'll participate, right? You'll start this new project, and this is born. What are some of the things that, if you think back about that brainstorming phase
Mhm.
of you thinking about the type of company you wanted to build and the type of brand that you wanted to build, like what did you want um, to be unique about your company, your brand, or what were some of the things that you had envisioned as far as like, we're going to differentiate ourselves through doing this?
I mean, all of it sounds so trite now because it's all been developed by people, but we wanted to have concierge level service.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted, to back up a little bit. For a certain time period of my life, I worked at a Bay Street law firm in Toronto, and and met my husband, moved to DC.
Mm-hmm.
I continued to work in Toronto for 6 years, living in DC,
Mm-hmm.
and only stopped after my second child. All that to say that I understood what it was like to have to travel for work in a high stress environment, leaving home, leaving maybe a
Mm-hmm.
kid at home. Sometimes I took them. But the point being is that I tell this story. It's kind of boring, but I used to stay at this, once I had to give up my apartment, I used to stay at this hotel, and I used to stay in the same room every time I came. And that sort of like need to, I had my route to work. I had the things that I knew what I was doing. But more importantly, what I noticed is one time I went and my room wasn't available, and they put me in the same room, but it was turned around the other way. And when I walked in, I was thrown off because now everyone's going to know how neurotic I am. But anyway, I went to hang up my stuff in the same place I'd always do, but it was on the other side. So it wasn't like a
Mm-hmm.
huge deal, but I remember noticing that. So we
Mm-hmm.
wanted to create a place where people that were coming to DC to, I don't know, argue with the Supreme Court,
Mm-hmm.
where we would be like, what is important to you? Where do you want to stay? Like, is
Mm-hmm.
it important for you that you have a grocery store near you? Or is it important for you that you have this near you? So like really provide that concierge level service and then have like on the ground people to service what they needed. So that was one aspect. And then because there's so many people that come to DC repetitively, right? Living on the hill or even in DuPont or wherever, there's a lot of people that will come for like 3 days out of the week.
Mm-hmm.
So we had conceptualized the idea of a membership of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So we really set out to create like a known operational high service brand.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. And then you end up finding this owner that gives you that multifamily asset of around 6 properties or so, and then COVID hits, you say, and then that's where, what happened then.
Well, first of all, like I think our primary obligation is to generate revenue for our
Mm-hmm.
owners.
Mm-hmm.
And that became very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And people weren't traveling. And so we didn't really have that much of a workforce.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean, you should interview Nicole. She is a true entrepreneur. She figured out, we started changing units around the configuration of them because a lot of students, once, even though school was online, if you lived out west and you went to, let's say, American or Georgetown or GW, you really needed to be on the East Coast. Right. So there were kids that were coming. And so we changed them a lot of them into like dorms. We like moved out the queens and king size beds and moved in single beds. And we looked for renters wherever we could. We were, we were new. And
Mm-hmm.
so, there was a lot of scamming going on. We got caught up in some things that really That's when being a lawyer came in handy.
Mhm.
Um, so just we were still really learning, and yet we were thrown into this like absurd environment. So not, we couldn't exactly implement our business plan. We just
Right.
had to survive and figure out how to generate revenue for our clients and ourselves.
Wow. And tell me something, because you mentioned that, at first your mindset was, I'll put someone in place, right, that
Mhm.
became your partner, and then you would most likely, continue practicing law and doing other things. But then you say that when COVID took place and there were so many things going on, that's when you kind of, is that when you left your job?
No. So, I mean, this is probably TMI, but like after my second child, working in Toronto became unsustainable. And
Mhm.
so I was actually started my own law firm,
Yeah, right, right,
practicing
right, right, right. Okay, it was your law firm.
Canadian.
You're right.
Yeah. So I was
Okay.
practicing Canadian trade law, but living in the United States. And
Mhm.
I also was in house counsel to a Canadian startup
Mhm.
that
Okay.
ironically they specialized in the hospitality industry. And so COVID hit and they had to do a complete pivot. And they
Mm.
actually, so they were a part-time staffing. They are still. They're they were a part-time staffing platform for the hospitality industry, and they pivoted to healthcare.
Oh, wow.
So that actually still took up a lot of time.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
So was it that you decided to just start investing more of your time on the business when COVID happened, because you just saw that, help was needed and resources were limited, and you know talent was limited, and there were a lot of challenges, and at what point, I'm just curious to know, at what point do you, or did you ever stop your law practice to focus on the business, the hospitality business, full time?
Yeah. So probably about God, time goes, I would say probably 2 years ago, I started. So I stopped really practicing law per se, like having my own practice. And
Mhm.
then I still was in house counsel for Staffy while I was doing this. But this is like, I mean, we have 22 employees. I mean, this is a full time job.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's just that as we grew, uh, I was just needed more and more and more. And so, you know, I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but it wasn't like I said to myself, I'm going to stop practicing law and I'm going to start working here. It was very
Mhm.
progressive.
Mhm. Okay.
So,
Okay. Yeah, there wasn't a day where you decided, oh, I'm gonna stop doing this, focus on that. It just happened. And then, what did COVID teach you, as far as that resourcefulness, or just, having to, like you were saying, just go after guests wherever you could find them? Like, when you look back at that time, what was the main takeaway for you,
mm,
or the main lesson that you took out of that difficult time?
that running a business, you do whatever you have to do. You just
Hmm.
you have to adapt and you have to survive, kind of like in life. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think I don't know. What did COVID teach anyone? I mean, hopefully it taught us resilience, but I am not an entrepreneur. I'm a lawyer. I'm risk adverse. I had a very set path.
Hmm.
Um, so I guess that COVID made me realize that there is no set path.
Hmm.
And sometimes you just have to go with it. You just have to go where the path is leading you and see where it takes you.
Hmm. And what, out of all the different things you tried to get guests, during times where there was not that much demand for travel and whatnot, what did you think was the thing that allowed you to survive? Like, was there one thing that you're like, okay, if we had not found this way of getting some guests coming in, or if we had not then done this, you know,
Right.
sort of crisis approach to
Easy.
cost cutting or whatever that might have been, we would not have survived.
The cost cutting thing is very funny because I tell you we're trying to create this brand
Hmm.
that really focuses on the customer and the senses, so the sensory experience of
Hmm.
the guest. And during COVID, we kind of had to pull back on some of those standards. And
Hmm.
I just remember that I was just so aghast at the fact that we had single ply toilet paper. And me and Nicole got in this big fight. I'm like, we can't have single ply toilet paper. She's like, we can't afford 2-ply toilet paper. So, anyway,
Wow.
yes. That sometimes
Okay.
you have to cut costs in order to keep going forward, I guess.
Yeah. So
You have
toilet
to
paper.
lower your expectations.
Cut where you have to. Okay. And then when do you think that for you, I mean, at this point, were you even thinking about adding more properties as you were also trying to just survive? Because again, we're talking about a big gap between where you started and now with 320 properties. So
No.
during COVID, was it just survival, or was it survival while also thinking about, hey, let's grow this?
Yeah, I mean, I think growing a company, there's various ways, obviously, that you can grow it, and you have to analyze what is the best for you. I think that the idea we never raised money, we never borrowed money.
Hmm.
We just needed to keep growing in order to generate more revenue because that was the only way we could grow.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh,
So you had to
so
grow to survive.
Well, I think you don't have to. I mean, it really, and I think this is an issue that our business really has. I find it very interesting. I don't know what the right answer is, but certainly, we've been approached probably once a year by private equity. Um, and so I think that first experience was very uh, determinative for us because you you realize that, like, we're really just a service industry. Some people come into this. So either you're in it for the real estate play, and that's great. Chances are you're not great at hospitality, which, is one thing, but you will probably do well and make money because real estate is a pretty solid investment.
Hmm.
And so that's one play. Then another play is, if you live in a vacation rental place and you just want to provide a service, I don't think you have to grow. But I don't think that either mine or Nicole's character is just by virtue of our characters, we're just continuously want to improve something. And
Hmm.
so, uh, and so we just kept moving forward and people kept asking us to manage their properties. And so
Hmm. Hmm.
we kept saying yes. And, there's always the market pretty much also drives a lot of it. So, like, what's interesting is during COVID, uh, we did get some larger clients because they also needed occupancy, and we seem to be pretty good at getting it.
Hmm.
So we that's when we onboarded some bigger clients. And what's interesting is we just saw like a big um, blip in condos, which, you know, condos are hard because most of them have HOAs that require a 6-month minimum. But
Hmm.
because of the market, people can't sell their condos. And they, for what, either have to leave or they've gotten married and they no longer want this small condo in downtown DC. And so we've had a lot of inquiries for condos. Um, and another interesting reason that people do furnished rentals in DC is by nature of the guest. So if you're thinking of selling your property in DC, uh, but you want to wait till the market conditions change, which arguably they are changing, but 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, um, you don't want to rent your place unfurnished. And the
Hmm.
reason you don't is because you don't want to get a professional tenant in there, and then you can never get them out. Right. Whereas if you're renting furnished on corporate platforms, chances are you're not getting someone who's even interested in staying in DC. So,
Mhm.
your chance of avoiding that scenario, which is a real scenario. Um, so people come to us for that reason. Or if they've
Mhm.
just bought a property and they, need to go through the permitting process, which could take 2 years. They don't want to rent unfurnished and then end up having to buy someone out. So they come to us, um, and we help them furnish and yeah, and then we put them up on our platform.
No, that makes
So,
sense. And I'm curious to know, because you mentioned that when private equity approached you a couple of times,
oh,
that there
right.
was something that clicked there.
We've
Is
said
it
this.
it clicked in the sense that you realize, okay, this is a business that can be
No, the
valuable, therefore
exact
let's
opposite.
grow it. Okay.
It's actually the exact opposite. And this, you're right. Thank you for bringing me back here. I realized that we don't own our assets other than, I own that property, but we're not in this to buy property. And so what we are is we're a service company. And the multiple you can get for a service company, what are you selling? You're selling service contracts.
Hmm.
So it's like buying a doctor's office or a law practice, right? They're just service contracts, unless you have a
Hmm.
brand,
Hmm.
right? And so we didn't set out to develop a brand for that reason. Uh, but the long and the short of it is like at 30 units, a property management company is not worth that much.
Hmm.
So you're almost better off continuing to run it and generating
Hmm.
income for yourself.
Hmm.
Um, and so, that first due diligence with that potential purchaser was very eye opening for us. Because remember, it's not
Hmm.
like we did all this research and we entered this industry because
Hmm.
this just kind of happened.
Hmm.
So we've been learning as we go along, and I think as this industry becomes more and more professionalized, it gets harder for those small companies um, to compete
Hmm.
because it just is, you know, there's so many professional tools and then they incorporate these huge expensive tech stacks and they're not making enough money to cover their tech
Hmm.
stacks. And, so all of a sudden at 30 units, it's a real business. And if you just went into it for the hospitality, like often what we hear from people with like 30 to 50 units is like, I hate doing the books. And I mean, just the administrative aspects of running a business, any
Hmm.
business, right? You don't think about that when you get into it. So,
Hmm. So a couple of things there. One, what changed strategically for you from that point onwards, from the moment you had that due diligence with a potential buyer? Like what clicked? What changed? Was it like let's double down on the brand? Was it let's just continue operating and running this and getting that income, like you were saying? But like what changed specifically?
well, I think we realized one, that we needed to grow
Hmm.
and continue growing
Hmm.
because that was the only way to fund all the things that we wanted to do was to create
Hmm.
sufficient revenue to fund all the things that we wanted to do.
Hmm.
Uh, and that at the end of the day, if we were successful in creating an operational brand in the disparate market, a sort of uh, like upper middle class brand, I guess is really what we are. I mean, we're not pure luxury, although we are starting to get some very, very high end units
Hmm.
and homes. And so I guess that's the evolution part.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
we're really good at what we do because we have focused on being an operational brand. And so we have focused on operations. So while we knew we had to keep growing, we didn't want to just grow until we could provide the level of service slash comfort that we set out to do because we didn't want to dilute our brand. And so we've really focused on perfecting our operations.
And let's talk about that. So you're at 30 properties now. You're thinking we need to perfect
Oh.
our operations,
Mhm.
right? Well, not now, back then when we were
Well,
talking
okay,
about it.
but at that point, we thought we could just be a hospitality brand.
Okay.
And in fact, the person, our big first client, he had a property manager for his buildings.
Hmm.
So we really could just were a hospitality provider. We were basically finding the guests, putting them in the units, and hosting them.
Hmm.
But that becomes really difficult on a number of levels. First of all, it becomes difficult for the building owner. Remember, we're not talking about huge class A multi family. We're talking about like 6, 9, 12 units.
Hmm.
Um, and so um, during COVID, we discovered that we had to become a property management company.
Okay, so up until that point, you were, as you said, you
We
were
were only
finding
in
the
it for the
guest and
hospitality.
hosting it. Hmm. Hmm.
Yes. And I think
So talk to
that,
me about that. What had to be put in place, and
oh,
before
now
you
we are
could say, okay, now we're
portfolio.
ready. Now we're ready to grow.
Oh, well, I think operationally, we discovered that we could not control the guest experience if we didn't become property managers.
Okay.
Because even now, to be honest, we've built an in-house maintenance team
Hmm.
because it's impossible to control third parties.
Hmm.
So if you're a guest and your toilet's broken, and we have to call an outside plumber, and we tell you, oh, the plumber will be there between 1 and 3, and the plumber doesn't come. I mean, what kind of guest experience is that? Right? Or they come and they're rude and they don't put the shoe things on and they make a mess or whatever. Do you know what I
Hmm.
mean? So our in-house maintenance team is very aware of our hospitality standards,
Hmm.
and they can communicate with our customer service team who can then communicate with the guest and ensure that whatever is occurring is not fully upsetting the guest experience. It gives us some control over the guest experience.
So that's great, and eventually getting to a point where you can afford to have all of those things in house. But when you first were thinking, okay, we're doing this transition from hospitality brand to property management company, did you
Mhm.
start by outsourcing some of these things, cleaning, maintenance, and then brought it on like in house?
Cleaning we outsource, but we more find our cleaners and help them build their own businesses.
Okay.
And then, but they're not, they are 1099s, but, and they have their own businesses. They work for other people, but they are very much part of Sojourn. Um,
Okay.
and similarly, we had third party providers that we certainly used third party providers, yes. Uh, but we had certain people that we used.
Hmm. Okay, so it's kind of like a mix in there. And then what was the most challenging part of making that switch from brand hospitality brand to property management company and hospitality operations company? Yeah,
Well, it's a lot more operationally challenging. And you
sure.
have a lot more responsibility and a lot more potential liability.
Hmm.
So, so then we focused on perfecting that, uh, and discovering sort of what was the right model for people. Because the truth is like a lot of the short-term rentals now in DC are people's primary homes. So a lot of them are accessory dwelling units or English basements or that kind of thing where the person is living in the unit. So you're not really going to manage the property, but you're managing the unit. So you're not going to be um, executing HVAC contracts on their behalf.
Okay.
But you have to make sure that the HVAC works for the guest.
Hmm.
So you have a little bit less control. So the more control you have, the better you can
Mhm.
control the guest experience.
Yeah.
But again, the more diverse your portfolio, I mean, why do you think everybody wants to get into Class A multi-units? It's a lot easier
Mhm.
from all perspectives. First of
Mhm.
all, you don't have people running all over the city. They're all in one building.
Mhm.
You don't usually have to do property management, right? Whereas if you're in these disparate environments and you have to do all those things, it's operationally challenging.
Mhm. That's interesting. And so, what was sort of the, well, before we go there, I want to understand from a liability exposure perspective, because it's not every day that you get to talk with someone that's doing this that also has that law background. What are some of the things that for you were must haves before you even thought of continuing to add clients, as far as protecting yourself from a liability perspective, that you think operators might be missing out on when they're not thinking about this as deeply as you for sure have?
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously general liability and E&O insurance,
Hmm.
uh, and then the contract, right? Those are the places on the owner side that you have to be concerned about. And I guess general liability also protects you from the guest side. But as a property manager, you are the agent of the owner. So you owe a duty to the owner. It's actually the owner that owes a duty to the guest, and you're just an agent. Um, so, but once you start in property management, then you're responsible for a lot more things. And when you're responsible to another person for certain things, there's a more potential for liability.
Hmm.
Um, and then it's our obligation to protect the owner. So, um, from a liability perspective, I think you have to be careful who you let in the units. So before we started, we were talking about different verification providers. If you're doing midterm plus 30 days, that's a whole other ballgame because in most jurisdictions, once you go over 30 days, you're in a landlord tenant
Hmm.
relationship, which is very different than a transient relationship.
Hmm.
So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that's one thing I would flag for the people that are just jumping into 30 days. If you are in a jurisdiction that is very, very pro tenant, you have to make sure that you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's. And that you're screening the tenant, you're doing all these things, or that the platform from which you're getting the tenant is screening them somehow, or that they're executing contracts with corporate clients that, in the contract are taking on liability for things that could possibly happen.
Hmm.
You just want to think
Hmm.
about it like, if something happens, who's responsible? And did I do everything I could reasonably do to protect whoever I owe that obligation to?
Hmm. And is there something that you wish you had in place, either from what you just mentioned or other things that you sort of realized afterwards, f- again, from a liability exposure protection perspective, like something that when you look back, you're like, hmm, this we put in place after we had an issue, but I wish I had put it in place from day one.
I mean, yes, we had a very, very big lesson during COVID when we just started and we didn't really know what we were doing. And we didn't think of ourselves as property managers. We thought of ourselves as hospitality providers. And we had somebody move in that didn't move out.
Mm.
And then, they had started as a short term guest off of Airbnb, uh, and then came back to us and said, I mean, we were so green and said, I need to stay for another week, or can I pay you weekly? And we let him into the unit and he never left. And it was a terrible experience. That was one of those COVID lessons. I mean, there were
Mm.
just more people out there taking advantage of people, and, people were desperate, people were isolated. Uh, so that would be the biggest lesson we
So what? How did you
learned.
solve that?
Oh, well, uh, a claim on our E&O insurance and a long legal battle to get the tenant out.
Okay, interesting. Wow,
Mhm.
tough. All right, and then
Mm.
let's go back to
But
the
just to take
concept
you
of.
back
Mhm.
to, sort of that give and take, um, we talked about a guest app. I don't know if that was on the show or it was before when we were chatting.
Before we
Um,
press record, yeah.
yeah, having a guest app, we went through that. We sort of looked at it in 2020, 2021, as well as we were of the view that we could not do direct bookings unless we had some kind of verification
Hmm.
mechanism.
Hmm.
And I really wanted to have assurance for the owner. So,
Hmm.
what happens if something breaks? What happens if there's an accident or not an accident resulting
Hmm.
from a guest? When you're on Airbnb, you have the host guarantee.
Hmm.
When you're not on Airbnb, what do you have? Nothing. So, that is why we went with what was once called Superhog, because they allow you, their verification is not as good as some other companies, but it's sufficient for what it does, which is if there is somebody, a bad actor, the second
Hmm.
you ask them to upload their ID, most of them disappear.
Hmm.
Uh, but they also, if you verify a guest with them, you pay us an extra fee, and then that stay it's not insurance, but they will cover any damage resulting from that stay. And so
Hmm.
for me, from thinking about liability and thinking about protecting the owner's interest, I didn't feel that we could do direct bookings without that. And
Hmm.
then we had a really hard time uh, coordinating the guest experience with a guest app and that, because remember, this was 2021, I think. And so things have evolved a lot since then. But yeah, we got so much pushback because we were using a guest app that had an identity. We were using a verification system that had an identity, and we were using a platform to book it. And so the guest had Sojourn had barely any visibility in the transaction.
Hmm.
Um, and so anyway, we kept the guest verification and we dropped the app.
Hmm. Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, no, we this is something that that has to be thought of, because the idea of getting direct bookings can sound good in theory, but in practice, it does come with a lot of additional risk and exposure
Mhm.
that has to be thought of as well. And
Yeah.
let's talk about that a little bit. So the concept of a brand, you were saying earlier how as a small to mid-sized property management company, your asset is the contracts, right? The service contracts you have with the owner, and that in and of itself, if you're small to mid-size, is not very valuable. And you said unless you have the brand,
Mhm.
how do you attribute value to a brand? What does that mean to you, and why and how do you think that actually brings more value to a management operation?
Well, if you create a known brand, a brand that's known in the market,
Hmm.
and you do that by providing a consistent service,
Hmm.
uh, and a consistent experience. I think, I mean, the one thing people return to hotels for is that consistent experience. So, um, especially when, if you're traveling for a long time or if you have kids, you're traveling with kids, etc. A hotel is not necessarily the best place for you, but at least you know what you're getting. And so I think there's a lot of companies out there that are trying to create known brands uh, so that they know if they book a Sojourn, they know they're going to have certain pillows. They know they're going to have certain linens. They know that the unit is going to be clean for the most part, unless something happens. And if it does, we'll do everything we can to make you comfortable and make it up to you. Um, you know that there's going to be somebody available if you need them. Do you know what I mean? You, we're trying to provide that security and comfort to someone. So the value of a brand is uh, the value of being able to attract guests and fill your units and
Mm-hmm.
generate revenue. So that is the added value. So let's just say we were to stop growing today, which is not
Mm-hmm.
happening. But we kept our 300 units and we excelled. We put all of our effort into excelling in what we do. The jurisdictions are large enough that there's value to that. So if you want to purchase us, you know that we have a dedicated following.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you have to maintain those standards. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I just think there's value in market awareness,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And now, when it comes to, let's say, you thinking about this brand, right, and
Mhm.
then building it and developing and scaling also the operation at the same time, you have a couple of things, right? You have consistency, which you mentioned. That's what a brand is, right? It's a certain set of associations between something that is consistent and your brand. And then the thing that is interesting is that you have kind of like two sides of building a brand in the property management space, because you have the guest facing side and you have the owner facing side. And then there's only so much budget in place that you
Mhm.
can allocate towards either choosing to, what some people would refer to as, trying to compete with Airbnb, if you're trying to go on the guest side to
But yeah, but yes and no. I mean, I don't really I mean, I like Airbnb. I don't know why everyone's so against it. I mean, we've built our business on Airbnb and they do provide services. Like
Mhm.
you are paying for it, but they provide services for both parts of the transactions. Even
Oh
if
yeah,
they're
definitely.
just think about the processing fee. I mean, they are
Definitely.
providing you
No, for
services. They're
sure.
providing you, some verification. They're providing you some insight into the guest. They're providing you that host guarantee.
Yeah. No,
So,
that's worth
but
a lot for sure.
but they are just a platform, right? They are a marketplace.
Hmm.
And so I see them as a partner.
Hmm.
Like, yes, I do want to get more direct bookings, but I don't know that we'll ever get to a place where we're not going to have to, everybody's on Airbnb. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter how
Even
big you are.
even the major hotel brands get a good portion of their bookings from OTAs. So it's
Right.
true that it's. I agree with you on that view. But my question was more around, okay, so you have a limited marketing budget, you want to
Hmm.
build a brand, and you can
Yes.
do that on an owner facing side of things to try to get more owners, or on a guest facing side of things to try to get more guests
Mm-hmm.
direct. How do you uh,
Hmm.
see those two sides of that brand in terms of where you deploy most of your resources and your capital? And in your case, was that even a need to invest resources into the owner acquisition side, or were you just so good that referrals were just coming at you?
I mean, I'm not very boastful, but uh, yeah, like our growth has been organic, and we focused our resources on the guest
Mm-hmm.
and not even necessarily guest acquisition. I mean, the first few years we didn't have a marketing budget. It was only last year that we started putting any effort
Mm-hmm.
into marketing, and it still is relatively small.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we're very focused on providing excellent service. And I think very old school. I think if you provide excellent service on either side of the equation, you will continue to grow and you will continue to get brand recognition. And so all of our resources have really gone into, you know, it took me 3 years to find our linens
Wow.
because I wanted a certain experience for the guest in our linens, which was impossible to provide in a disparate environment. And really that experience is 100% Perkel long staple Egyptian cotton, which you
Mhm.
can't do in a disparate environment because how do you get the sheets to not be wrinkled?
Mhm. Mhm.
But we did find eventually a product that may or may not be 100% cotton, but feels like it is, and therefore doesn't wrinkle. So we have put, like I said, so much of our heart and our effort into perfecting the guest experience. So whether that be
Mhm.
on how do you go fix a toilet or how do you answer a guest or how do you make sure that the guest has a comfortable night's sleep? All
Mhm.
those things are really, really important to us.
Mhm. And then on the owner's side, what allowed you to scale so fast? I mean, is it a lot of owners that have multi units, or one client for you represents on average more properties than for the average, property manager? Or again, I agree,
Yeah. So for
service, when service is good,
DC,
referrals come. But yeah.
it is a lot of small multifamily owners and individual properties.
Hmm.
But we probably get like five inquiries a week from individual, right? Because DC is a very restricted market.
Hmm.
Uh, in the Tidewater area, it was more investors. And so
Hmm.
we've added larger multi units, which has allowed us to increase our inventory
Hmm. Okay.
quick.
Okay. And it's all been organic, as in like they reach out to you, they learn about you from someone, or they go to your website. Like, has there been
Or
any
networking.
networking? Hmm.
Hmm.
Right, right, right. So
Yes,
it's not like you've been out there trying to chase and get owners. They've
well,
kind
I
of.
mean, of course we are,
Hmm.
but we haven't really committed financial resources to that, I
Got
guess I
it,
would say.
got it. Okay. Sweat equity,
But
like
yes,
just
we're
energy.
always
Yeah.
looking for great
Hmm.
clients.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, I was just trying to find if there was something that you had, crack the code or something as far as homeowner
yeah,
acquisition,
I,
that because some people
I
are very technical on that
code.
side. You're more so on the guest side, which is amazing to see that when you care about the service, that the results will come. Because
Yeah,
I always repeat this saying: you only sell because you don't know how to market. You only market because you don't know how to do product or service. If you do product or service well, you don't need marketing, you don't need sales. The product should sell itself. So
right. So
interesting.
that's what I believe. I believe if you provide a good service, people will come to you.
Hmm. No, that's amazing. And I want to touch on something too, which is the intersection between long-term rentals, mid-term rentals, corporate housing, short-term rentals. I see a big opportunity in that. Looking forward at the industry, primarily because of how many industries are being affected by regulations, and
Hmm.
just overall the stability that in some cases that recurring sort of revenue can
Right.
bring to the table. But it's
Yes.
hard to execute, right? Because even from a tech stack perspective, I mean, of course, that has changed a lot from when you started to now. But like,
No, it
maybe
hasn't.
not.
Thanks
Okay,
God.
it hasn't. Oh, and like from an OTA and distribution perspective, like,
Hmm.
talk to us about what are some of the challenges in trying to be that company that bridges that gap and connects, all those different sources of bookings.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of work. It's complicated. And so, back to COVID, I remember talking to my neighbor who had just sold his tech company. And I said, Steve, can you just go build us a software that services short-term rentals and mid-term rentals, right? And he's like, no, I can't do that. And he said, and I said, well, should we build it? And he said, no, you should not build it. He said, you don't have the expertise. And you can't, like, it's not just building it. You then have to like manage it, and you have to continuously improve it, etc. So we have operated 2 different softwares since our inception. So we have traditional
Really?
property management software, and then we have Guesty.
What would Guesty
Yeah,
need to
very
have
exciting.
from a features perspective for you to be able to let go of your other PMS?
You should have me back on in a year, and I will tell you, because we have been out there in the market searching for some relief on the tech side. And everybody is trying, and maybe the product is out there and I just don't know it, which is possible. But traditional property management software, one is the ability to tenant screen to the level that you need to tenant screen for an actual tenant, then execute a lease. Then the lease goes into the ledger, right? And then you have a running ledger. On the tenant side, also, there's a lot more expectations. I mean, these multifamilies have, like the big multifamilies have been putting so much money into their tenant experience, right? And their software is now unbelievable. I mean, I think they're getting some pushback now, at least in DC, on the fees they're charging for all this tech. But the ability of the tenant to go in and pay their ledger, right? Because they're not paying it all up front; they're paying it monthly, right? They have to be able to go in on the first of the month and pay. So these are all things that you can't really do on traditional property management software. And then there's the task side also. The traditional property management software has, come much, I don't know if it's much farther, and I'm not even familiar enough with it to say that, like, if you just have a vacation rental / transient short-term company, I think there's certainly fabulous software out there. But the way we've built our company, we've just built it on the basis of these 2 softwares. So that's
That's
where
so
we're at.
interesting. And that's super interesting. What else have you not found a solution for from a tech stack perspective? What else is something that when you look around at all of the pieces of your tech stack, you're like, I wish there was something that did this one thing, but I just haven't found it.
Yeah, I think there are some softwares out there that, again, that do it. What's important to me is like the task aspect, and making sure that gets billed properly without human intervention. So if someone puts in a task, how does that task then get dispersed? How does it get addressed? How does it get communicated to customer service and the maintenance team? And then how does that cost get properly apportioned? And I think there is software out there that does that. But it's the connection between operations and the guest experience that we've had to manually address. And that's
Interesting.
been operationally challenging and has required a lot of human resources.
Interesting. And then what do you think that this model of combining midterm, long-term, and short-term, some people are referring to it as flex leasing, where you have both, but like, what do you think is the impact for the
That's like
investor?
our tagline has always been flexible furnished leasing,
Oh, okay.
because that's what we do, right? Because,
Right.
and again, it's by virtue of experience. A lot of people come here and they think they're coming for 3 months, and then next thing you know, they're staying for 6 months. I have somebody who moved into my building, who came to work for someone on the hill. She thought she'd be staying 3 months. She's now been there 5 years. She's been there 5 years. So, she came for 3 months, then we gave her a year lease. She extended a couple times, then we gave her a year lease, and she's just been signing year leases ever since then.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
again, like, we're focused on the guest and their
Mm-hmm.
needs. Um, and the owner, as I said. But so they don't know what's going to happen. They're in a transitionary state, unless you're doing, again, pure vacation rental, in which case that's probably not happening. But
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, so we just adapt to what our guests need. And we
Yeah.
have the capability to do that.
Mm-hmm. So because you also have the perspective from the investor side. I mean, you started by managing that building that your husband had acquired nearby. So what do you think is the impact of this flex leasing model on the investor side? Because the way I see it is,
And
you always have more liquidity when you do short term, or most of the times, and then but
well,
on the
not the
long term,
financing.
not the financing. There you go. So how are you, as an investor of a multi-unit property, able to get the best of both worlds in terms of the financing for the long term, while also getting the cash flow and liquidity of the short term? Like, what does that look
It
like?
depends. It really depends on the investor, the size of the investor. Like, if you're talking about big institutional investors, they are so savvy. And really, I think they're either trying to generate revenue in the lease up stage, or, when they have to transition from a construction loan, they need long term renters because they need that consistent revenue. So, there's people a lot smarter than me in this. And I think at that stage, you have to be very, very sophisticated to understand what their needs are and how you fit into them.
Hmm.
Like, for instance, Placemaker, when they started, and I think they're still doing this, Y Hotel, like, they came from a very, very large, I don't even know what veranda was, or verando, but he understood the financing structure and how he could fit that in. So what they did originally, this is how they started, is during the lease up phase, they would literally go in, and they got special zoning from the city to do this for a defined period of time. And they were able to do short term rentals while the building got leased up. And then they would leave and they'd go to that developer's next building. But I think I think they still do have a little bit of that business model, but they've now really, they now are in actual buildings, um, and doing mostly, I think, corporate rentals. But to get back to your original question, which I find fascinating, is the convergence of all of these things, right? What is the difference between an extended stay hotel and a part hotel? What makes a short term rental as opposed to a midterm rental? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
as the owner, when you're constructing the place, that's something that you have to consider. Do you want to be able to do midterm? Because if you do, you need a full kitchen, pretty much. You need washer dryer. Like, those are the things that are important to people if they're
Hmm.
staying for a long period of time. And one of the reasons they're choosing to stay in a part hotel instead of a an extended stay hotel, right? So, um, I don't know where it all pans out and where all the distinctions are, but
And right now, like currently, from a revenue management perspective, in terms of dealing with this flex leasing model, what have you learned? Right, we were talking about it on how at first you were just kind of like putting it out there and on Airbnb and seeing what came. Right now, what have you learned in terms of, okay, are you trying to optimize those high demand, high ADR months with short term, and the rest of the year you'll just leave it, for midterm or long term? Are you trying to, like, only allow people to rent midterm, long term for certain months of the year with certain booking windows, and then when
well, I
it's
think,
more last minute? you become more flexible, or what's your philosophy around, from a revenue perspective, how you can deal with flex leasing?
Well, from a revenue perspective,
Yeah, from a revenue perspective.
oh, I mean, if you get an insurance client that's going to pay $12,000 a month, you don't care how long they stay. You're happy for them to stay a year. Why wouldn't you be? But really, the first hurdle is the regulatory environment,
Mm-hmm.
and what is that unit permitted to do
Mm-hmm.
from a zoning perspective. So that's the first step in defining what a building will do. And then, yes, and then I think it is a matter of um, all of those factors have to come into play, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to take a $3,000 a month lease that goes through till June in a unit that can do short term in downtown DC. That doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
But in a different market or a different month or for a different time period, you can't fully control all of that. But these are all the factors that you have to think about.
Mm-hmm. Would you agree that there's also less data available on the midterm rental side of things to make those kind of decisions? Like,
Yeah, that's why you have to know your market. There's more data now than
okay,
there ever has been.
but
And
like as far as like a dynamic pricing tool, like there are so many in the vacation rental side of things,
right.
or market data sources that scrape OTAs and whatnot. Are there tools like that, but that scrape, the long-term
Mhm.
midterm rental
I
sites,
think that there are some tools out there. But again, the other thing is like
combining the
there's
two?
there's so much data out there and there's so much product out there and there's so much technology out there, but like how much is too much? I mean,
Hmm.
again, go back to we're really just service providers only making a certain percentage
Hmm.
plus whatever upsells you have, plus if you're running different departments, furnishing, maintenance, wherever you can generate more revenue.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, if you spend all your money on a tech stack, you're not going to have a profit. And,
Hmm.
you're running a business. So your obligation is to generate a profit. And I
Hmm.
think that is like, it's almost like people have to have a discipline over their tech stack because it all
Hmm.
looks great and it all sounds great. And it actually all would be great if
Hmm.
it didn't cost anything, but it does. So you have to be a business person and decide, what do I truly need? What's the cost going to be? How much money am I going to save? You know,
Hmm.
and is
Yeah.
it realistic?
And then understand that you might have the best tool in the world. And we use the analogy of a tool being a plane. But if you don't have the pilot available to onboard it and learn how to use it and monitor it and tweak it and set it up, then you have an expensive toy. That's all you have.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So,
Hmm.
and you have to also have the time to properly leverage the technology and learn it.
Yeah.
And we're a very operational, time consuming business. So, you
Hmm.
know, I
Yeah.
don't
No,
know.
this is so interesting. And Lucy, just wrapping up thoughts.
Yeah.
What would you do differently if you were starting over, if anything?
Oh, God. Maybe not start right before COVID. So,
The timing.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that because it's just, we're constantly evolving and constantly looking at where we are and where we want to go.
Hmm.
Um, I don't really look back at so much.
But maybe something you would have avoided, doubled down on earlier.
Ooh,
Just as far as advice for someone that's looking at you and is inspired and is thinking, oh, "Wow,
that would be
I
nice.
wanna build this.
Yes.
I wanna grow my operation to that level. I wanna maintain those quality standards even at scale." Like, what advice would you give to someone that's you know in that stage of maybe being small, mid-sized as an operation, but looking to get into that next level of growth?
I mean, I would say think about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Why do you want to grow? And then that will help you decide on a path forward. So like I said, if you want to grow because you want to acquire properties, then, that is the path you should follow. Um, if you want to grow because you want to develop a brand, then you should focus on the service you're providing and the brand that you're creating. I don't believe in just image. I, like you, believe that you have to provide the solid service or good in order to create a brand. But in today's world, you might be able to fake it for a little bit. Uh, uh, so I would just look inside and see why you're building this business. Are you doing it for the hospitality because you actually genuinely enjoy the experience? Then why do you need to grow? Like,
Mhm.
and I think they call it, like, is this a lifestyle business? You know what I mean? Like, it's okay to have a business that you enjoy doing, that generates enough money for you to live and hopefully retire well. That's okay.
Mhm.
So I
So
would say,
why do you want to grow?
why do I want to grow? Because I want to accomplish something, which is create a known operational brand in the disparate market.
Yeah.
So
And so tell us a little bit about that vision. When you look ahead, maybe I don't know how far out you do your planning, but what do you see? A year away, 5 years away. What's the future uh, in the way you see it in your mind for Sojourn?
well, I think that we would like to maybe operate in a more, like, have the opportunity to operate in a more contained unit. So whether that is like a condominium complex or a boutique hotel, motel. So I see, and then we could really, really focus on the guest experience and
Hmm.
um, perfecting that. I'd like to, there are some things I'd like to put in the unit that we haven't been able to really effectuate and afford because, the larger you are, better deals you can get. So
Hmm.
there's some things that, like, are just too expensive to buy 30 of, but if you have to buy 600 of them, you maybe now you can afford them.
Hmm.
So I would just like to perfect all that, and then obviously we are looking at what growth in other markets looks like.
Hmm.
Um, and I think one area that I would like to crack is sort of how to provide some kind of framework for those people that are at like 30, 50 units and struggling.
Hmm.
I'd like to solve that issue. Is there a way we can support them in achieving their goals and objectives, grow Sojourn and grow the brand,
Hmm. Kind of like a franchise, perhaps, model that could.
but not franchise because you can't control the brand in a franchise. So it's not franchise
Hmm.
and it's not a roll up. All of those things are being tried, some
Hmm.
successfully, but, I don't think we can be the brand we want to be in a franchise model. So I don't know what the
Hmm.
model is.
Hmm.
So I'd like to figure it out.
So stay tuned for part two so we can know what the model looks like. No,
Yes,
that's super.
exactly. And if you have any ideas, feel free to
No,
forward them.
definitely. I think that it's been super insightful. And there's listen, I could keep you here for hours and hours, but I just want to ask one last question because
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of companies have tried to build a brand and scale a brand and
Mhm.
have it go national or perhaps even international. Why do you think that no other company has succeeded at building a recognized guest facing brand in the vacation rental space like the hotels have been able to do? And what do you think is needed for you to become the first company to be able to do that at a national level perhaps, or international level perhaps at some point as well?
Oh, wow. You are. Um, well, I think one is we haven't taken on investors. Once you take on investors, that, changes the dynamic. You can't make choices in the same way.
Hmm.
And maybe they took on a lot of money and tried to grow too fast.
Hmm.
Um, I think there are some people out there that are creating brands, but I think it is very, very difficult
Hmm.
to create a brand in this market. And I think a lot of them are, becoming, again, this is that convergence concept. A lot of them are then taking on large buildings, large multifamily buildings, and then branding that building. But then how are they
Hmm.
any different from a hotel? Like, look at Sonder. How is
Hmm.
Sonder surviving right now? Because the only reason they're still alive is because they signed that licensing agreement with Marriott, and they're just going to become another Marriott brand.
Hmm.
So I don't know the answer, but it's certainly interesting. And I
Yeah,
mean, I like to figure things out. I'm a lawyer. That's what I like to do, try to figure them out. So we'll see.
definitely. No, no, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate your generosity here with all the learnings, the insights, the lessons, the stories. We'll stay in touch, and looking forward to seeing where you take this company.
Me too.
Yeah. All right. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.